to the Web3 Prof Podcast.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with Nick Pennie, co-founder of Helius Labs. Nick, thanks for being with me here today.
Yeah, great to be here.
So, Nick, I'd love to just get things started with hearing from you just a little bit of the story of Helius. Before we get into that, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get into crypto?
Sure. I think like a lot of other people, I started around 2017 era, just getting exposed to, basic tokens, buying, selling, that sort of stuff. Mostly speculative, custodial stuff, less on the actual development side, less close to the actual metal.
Yeah.
Then it wasn't until around founding Helius that I really kind of got down to the weeds of what it's like to actually build decentralized apps and build like blockchain focused infrastructure.
So, how did you end up creating Helius? And tell us a little bit about yourself and your co-founders.
Sure. Yeah. So first off, my sort of technical background, my career has always been focused on developer tooling, developer productivity, essentially like to build products that make it easier for people and businesses to build other products. And I find that really fulfilling just to help people build better things.
Yeah.
The scope of impact is quite large there. And so for Helius, the history there is that the three co-founders all knew each other from school, actually. We all went to Queen's University together. We did applied math, computer science. We kind of stayed in touch over the years. And Mert, the now CEO, was at Coinbase, so he was kind of heavily involved in crypto. And he was one of the early people to really get focused and put a lot of energy towards Solana. He was doing early chain analysis and reports, and he was doing NFT projects and stuff in the really, really early days, 2020, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And we would talk all the time about this. And at one point, we started going a bit deeper, and he showed me kind of all the problems that exist on Solana, just how hard it is to build things, how hard it is to read the chain. And that got me really, really motivated because I realized, wow, I knew this technology was impactful and useful, but it's never going to see the light of day if the developer experience is so poor.
Yeah.
It's too hard for people to build actual products right now. And so that's what we founded Helius. We founded Helius with the overall goal of essentially accelerating the adoption of crypto-powered systems, but doing it by making it as easy as possible for developers to build things.
Mm.
And on Helius specifically in Solana, we started off on Solana because it's fast and cheap and the best place for that. And we decided to focus on human readable history. So if you're trying to look at a block explorer or figure out what were my past 10 transactions, it's extremely cryptic. It's all hashes, and the token model is very, very confusing unless you know it very well. And so we tried to build all these APIs to expose that. And people loved that, but we quickly realized that there were other things people needed, and there were problems further down the stack. So we started going kind of lower and lower down the stack. And so now most people know us as an RPC provider, but our history started off more a bit higher up the stack.
And what are the roles between the three co-founders? Mert obviously is the face of the company. He's the one that everyone in Solana sees on Twitter all the time, making all kinds of interesting statements, and is super exciting to follow. But how do your guys' roles break down between the three of you?
Yeah, so I guess formerly Mert's the CEO, I'm formerly COO, and Liam is the CTO. But really how that kind of plays out is that Liam and I basically split the whole tech side of the business and focus a lot on internal, and Mert focus a lot on external. So basically marketing, business development, outreach, fundraising, that's all Mert's domain, and basically product direction as well. And then Liam and I are focused on execution, how do we actually build these systems, and who do we hire to help build them, as well as all the operations that's involved there as well.
When you look at the project that you created, it sounds like you weren't looking at other blockchains. You've specifically first looked at Solana and then built on Solana. Is that right? It wasn't like you were trying to solve a problem and chose Solana. You found a problem on Solana and built your company around that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because actually, it actually is the former you said. We didn't build the business for Solana. We built the business for a bigger purpose. The intention is to make it our overall mission of Helius is to accelerate the adoption of crypto powered systems. right? We want to make it easier for this sort of technology to actually have real world application, to benefit people, to generate a new financial system, all that sort of good stuff. But there's a bunch of like precursors that need to have, there's like things you need to have before that actually happens. And the first thing you need is a chain that is relatively cheap and fast. No one wants to wait like a minute before like their purchase finishes, and it also can't cost them like $5 or $10 if they're trying to just like buy bread or something, right? So that kind of led us to looking at Solana as one of the places that actually had the potential for where we saw crypto, and also culturally we really liked it because the people that were focused, it was more engineering driven. The mindset was more engineering focused. Focus was on products. So we were familiar with the other chains, but just the directions they're going in made less sense for our mission. That's when we focused a lot on Solana as a result. And I guess if you were to brand us more as like an infra provider, you could say that we kind of specialize more in high performance blockchains where you have a lot of scaling problems. So we try to address those scaling problems for people.
But you're only on Solana, right?
Right now we are only.
And are you going to shift to work in other blockchains?
There's no immediate plan because there's no immediate plan. We certainly would if we felt compelled to. And the reason there's no immediate plan, and we thought about this a lot, especially as like, after FTX collapse and after the various sort of like bear markets, you always think, should we expand somewhere else? Like, what do we do? And we just kind of stuck to our original thesis is that our goal is to kind of do something a bit differently than most other RPC providers or infra providers who kind of went for breadth rather than depth.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to build like a mediocre RPC that covers every single chain. But our goal is instead is like, let's just make the developer experience as good as possible in one place. And we can make it so good that we can actually make that chain more desirable to other people. So instead of trying to extract value from a market, we're actually trying to grow that market altogether. And so to answer your question, I guess we're not opposed to going to other chains, but we felt there's so much work still to be done in Solana, so much potential that's untapped. There's no point in like splitting our resources.
Right. Yeah. And it seems like with the popularity of Solana during the current market, you definitely played it right because Solana is effectively dominating the landscape at this point. It's now from a token perspective, it has the fourth largest market cap, only after Tether, Ethereum and Bitcoin. And so it's done extremely well, flipping many other tokens, and the popularity and the usage on the chain is absolutely outstanding. So when FTX crashed and you guys were thinking, should we move somewhere else? I'm sure it was probably hard to stick to your guns from that perspective. And now I would imagine you're probably thankful for doing that. Am I right?
Yeah, 100%. It worked really well for us. And honestly, like it was probably one of my favorite points in the history of the company was that like post FTX collapse, everyone that stuck around was so serious.
Right.
So such like a good gang of just like founders that we were all working with, like other teams, other customers, that sort of stuff that were just really committed to the overall like mission, what Solana could be, what crypto could be, not focused, no fluff. Right. Signal to noise ratio is fantastic.
Yeah.
So I do kind of miss that. But yeah, definitely it worked out really well for us. And I think we did it for two reasons. Reason one was because that we held our guns to we had conviction in what we believed in. That's the first one. Number two also is I think like you have to make some gambles as a startup, right? If you try to just jump around between all sorts of places or don't have enough focus or not enough conviction, you're never really going to have that sort of like asymmetric advantage that lets you actually go from being nothing to entering the market, especially in infra spaces where you have pre-existing dominant players like Alchemy and QuickNode who existed, who were significantly more capitalized, had like 100+ engineers. They were around in the previous bull markets before us. So they rose up in like 2017 era, like a lot of funding. And we had, let's see, at the time, I think we just finished like before FTX, we raised like 3 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but for infra, it's actually not that much runway because you just need to build a lot of, the Solana machines are kind of expensive. You got to build, set up a lot of them. You need global coverage before people want to use you. So there's a lot of like the kind of table stakes you have to hit before you have a service people are interested in using. Right. Is like relatively expensive.
Yeah. Who in your founder group are doing most of the fundraising, or is it all three of you?
It's all Mert on the fundraising side. When it comes to kind of like marketing and BD and that sort of stuff, it's all Mert. And then Liam and I focused a lot on the tech and just the internals. We both did a lot of tech, and I focused a little bit more on the tech plus ops side.
Okay. I mean, he obviously has a huge following on Twitter and is
Yeah.
is a character in and of itself within the Solana ecosystem. You know, people are always interested to hear what he has to say or what he thinks on things. So it's no surprise that he's driving. And is it public how much money you guys have raised?
Yeah, I believe so.
And so what is that?
So by now we've raised, I think, a total of about roughly 35
Wow.
million. Yeah.
And how does it feel being a young man from a small Canadian city raising $35 million? Do your friends even know what you do?
Yeah, I guess that's a funny you bring that up. They do, but they also, a lot of them are not into crypto at all.
Yeah.
So they don't really have a sense of how we're doing this stuff. They're like, oh, Nick's just doing his tech founder stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Like, good for him.
Yeah.
And I don't really talk about it too much. And,
Yeah.
which is kind of cool, though, because honestly, you put so much time and energy into it that you're kind of living and breathing it for, 12, 14, 15 hours a day.
Yeah.
So when you go, maybe it's a Friday night, you go talk to someone else, it's kind of nice to just like,
Not talking about that.
yeah, just take a little break and get a reset switch. But
Yeah. So one of the big selling features of Helius is the developer-friendly APIs and the tools that you offer. So if we look at that, how do you see these tools simplifying the lives of blockchain developers, and what problems specifically have they solved for developers?
yeah, it's an interesting question because we kind of, again, like I mentioned before, we started sort of high level and went like almost like lower level as a result.
Yeah.
And I guess they solve problems for slightly different developers. But to answer the question, I'd say there's almost two things that we need to do as an infra company to improve the dev experience. And the first one's kind of the more obvious one is like build new features and tools that make it easier to do stuff. That's the obvious answer. The second one that I think people don't always realize is that Solana is like an ever-changing ecosystem and environment. So the chain itself is getting faster, its behavior is becoming different. There's more validators, more RPC nodes. The validator clients are constantly changing and evolving. There's introduction of Jito client, Jito changes, Firedancer's coming on board. You now have these like L2s and SVM stuff as well. So the landscape's kind of changing, and the actual like behavior of the network changes, and we also, our responsibility the whole time is to essentially stay up to speed with that and to try to give developers a consistent experience even though those changes are happening. So we provide kind of this like buffer almost between like the whole, the rabbit hole of tech that's kind of powering this chain, and then like just the APIs that you want to call as a user. Because no one wants to hear like, oh, hey, why is the data so stale? And it's like, oh, it's because of some, the way that this technical jargon's happening on the underlying validator because the introducing this patch. No one cares.
Yeah.
They just want us to fix. They don't want us to experience that. So we are kind of like we're like the first adopters of the newer branches. We're always testing all the changes that happen in Solana. We're playing around with those ahead of time to try to shield, I guess, users as much as possible from uncertainty and changes in the network.
How far ahead of time are you guys often working on something that I'm going to experience as a crypto trader? A couple months ahead of when I'm going to experience it, or longer?
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess it's a mix. It depends on circumstances, but we're sometimes working with code or playing around with things that are, 6 months plus out, sometimes a few weeks out. And sometimes we'll run stuff that's not like fully released yet or various modifications because it improves an existing problem. So we're always kind of mix and matching various things to try to, I guess, give the best experience possible.
Yeah. So what are some problems that you guys have solved or had to overcome building on Solana, and how did you guys overcome some of those problems?
Yeah, wow, there's so many, so it's a bit sort of like hard to go over them. On a product, like a higher level product point of view, some of the core problems that we found that we try to solve is, first off, there wasn't really a good event-driven model.
What is that?
So what that means is, as a developer, sometimes you have two ways of getting data. One is like, it's like push or pull. So you can have data sent to you and you're basically consuming it, or you could be requesting it and saying like every 1 second, hey, is there more data? Hey, is there more data? And so when I say event-driven model, I mean the push-based one, where you say, I want to get all the data about this and just funnel it over to me. And that didn't really exist at the time when we started. So we developed the webhooks where you can basically say, hey, I want to listen to, I don't know, Magic Eden, and I want to get all the NFT sales. Send those transactions to me and only those to this endpoint. So that's one of the first things we built. And from there, we did like improved WebSockets, and we also started offering the like gRPC streaming as well. Basically, other sort of tools that makes it easier to have that sort of push-based model, which a lot of people really like because it's lower latency than doing the pull one, because you don't have to wait until your next request. It just comes once it's ready.
Right.
And then the other problem that we've found is that as the Solana gets more expensive, it becomes tougher to build things that require a lot of accounts, because accounts require rent. So certain apps become kind of like their design space becomes a little like prohibited by the cost of the native token relative to like, fiat. And so we were one of we heavily invested in like state compression when it came about. I'm not too sure it's worth going more into what state compression is, but to keep it, I guess, very high level, what it is, it's like account alternatives, where it provides about like somewhere between 100 to 1,000x cost savings on accounts by essentially storing this like compressed fingerprint on the chain. And then instead the history of the chain has the actual like state changes of the accounts. And then what we do, as well as other providers can, is we keep track of those changes, and we keep track of the fingerprint that's on the chain. And then we give you the current state of the account plus like a cryptographic proof that says like this data is actually valid.
Is this do we see this the result of a CNFT?
Yeah, CNFT is basically just a compressed NFT. So it's an NFT that uses compression.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so when we look at newcomers to blockchain, what role do you think Helius plays in making this more accessible for regular people who are going to experience some type of app on Solana? How do you guys impact the everyday user?
Yeah, I guess it depends who you define as the everyday user. I would say the main impact that we have on, say, like the real everyday user, like someone who just wants to, buy something and they're not really focused on development at all. Is that we make it easier for people to build the right products for those people. Anyone who has a good idea of here's a way I can build this new product, like say, Pump.Fun recently took off a lot in the past year, right? They have great TMF. They're one of our customers. And so we make it easier for them to build that product, and then that gives a better experience then for, your everyday user.
Yeah.
I think a bit beyond that, though, what we're also doing is we invest a lot into educational content. It is a bit more developer focused, but I do think we still also put out a lot of blog posts that could still suit just the everyday person who has concerns about, security or decentralization or what is a validator. Because I think a lot of people, when they enter this space, they want to know, where's my money going? What are the risks? How it's behaving? And some people want accessible information that goes maybe one level lower than just trust me, bro.
Yeah.
But isn't just filled with just straight technical jargon.
For sure.
And I think our blog does a good balance of summarizing things on a slightly higher level, but also letting people, if they want to, go a bit deeper into the tech.
Yeah. And so when we look at the everyday user, basically you guys are providing a simple place for developers to build something that the everyday user or the super user can engage with. When we look at something like Pump.Fun, and you say that they're one of your clients, how are you guys creating or generating revenue from a client like Pump.Fun? Are they paying a monthly fee for APIs, or how is that constructed?
Yeah, exactly. Our business model is kind of very similar to like your traditional SaaS or platform as a service, or similar to DigitalOcean or AWS, in the sense that you get a plan with us, you can pay it with crypto or fiat, and then you have certain limits with your plan. So, for example, you can query up to X amount, and if you pay more if you want to query more at higher rates.
Yeah.
And then, so what we give for most of these customers, the simplest way to put it is the ability to read and write to the chain. For Pump.Fun, when you're trying to make a trade, they will send their transaction through us, and we have this like optimized transaction delivery system that tries to make sure that your transaction gets included in the chain, but also gets delivered as fast as possible to reduce that latency. And then also, anytime you're loading your dashboard, you want to see your portfolio, or you want to see the state of like what these current tokens are doing. It's also querying us behind that as well.
What do you see for the future of Solana versus other blockchains? What are some of maybe the cool features that we're going to experience or that developers are going to experience? And what are things that are being created on Solana that you guys at Helius are excited about? Or what are you creating on Solana that people are excited about?
I'd say on a product side, I mean, for me personally, and I'd say honestly, a good amount of people at Helius too, we like Deepin. I think Deepin's really cool. And Solana's a really good place for that because of, as we said before, the low fees and the high throughput. So there's a few of them that come to mind. There's, the well-known one was Helium, who migrated from their own chain to Solana. There's also the Render network that migrated over. There's also Hive Mapper that's quite cool. They're building out this like mapping system where it's basically community-generated maps with an incentive program. And I find those are most exciting because they essentially use crypto to do something that couldn't really be done as easily outside of crypto. It creates like an incentive structure that you wouldn't see in a traditional model, where it's actually like a decentralized incentive structure for people to do community generated products. Yeah.
I think those are great examples. I've had a few Helium nodes for a few years now, and exciting to see other products like the Honey token with Hive and things like that coming online. Because it's interesting, right? Because you think of like the inefficiencies of the Google car driving around mapping the world versus everybody or a ton of people, including bus drivers, taxi drivers, and truck drivers having cameras in their cars doing this through this decentralized infrastructure projects. It seems like there is an incredible efficiency built into something like that. Yeah. Does Helius help with those types of projects, or are any of those your clients?
Yeah, we work with all of them, honestly. We work with almost everyone, just in some capacity. But for example, like Helium, we worked with them on their migration and launch. They use this for, general data reading, writing. Yeah. But beyond that as well, they needed to distribute their rewards, their hotspot rewards. Yeah. So they opted to use compressed NFTs for that. And they were one of the first adopters of compressed NFTs. So we worked very closely with them during that launch to kind of iron out a lot of the points in the compression system. That's I think one of the most interesting use cases.
I think when we think about Deepin in crypto, I think there's been a lot of hype about it, but I think the investors who are watching the token prices haven't seen like the play out of these as we did maybe like meme coin. I think people are thinking, well, Render and Helium are going to pump really hard because decentralized infrastructure has kind of been maybe the most common narrative that we've heard over the last few months. And so I guess it'll be interesting to see if that really does play out from that perspective. But I often hear from people like yourself who are actually building stuff. You don't really pay attention to the token price. You're not really looking at things like that. What are you looking at to determine whether something like Hive Network is successful?
That's a good question. I'd say that I look at them a lot more like you'd look at standard Web2 businesses, I guess, determined to do well. Like, what are the founders like? How much conviction do they have? Yeah. How determined are they? How are they approaching the business? How are they thinking differently about things? Yeah. I look at the tech, the decisions they're making, the questions they're asking, the direction they're going. Are they just following trends, or do they actually trying to set a certain specific path? And so, use that to determine whether or not I think the project's going to succeed. But even then, it's still kind of a gamble. It's an art that I don't yet have because I'm not a VC, so I tend to stay a bit more in my lane. But I will, circling back to the kind of pump.fun and meme coins and their success, I think that, it's really easy to find PMF in those domains because that's essentially a casino. And I think that's also a good thing, though, because it's kind of, meme coins sort of provide like a litmus test for a chain. Like, can it actually support this sort of behavior, because you need to have a fast chain of low fees. So the stores have to actually be engaging. And if this works, then you can start applying it to the more like sort of, unsexy, but still important stuff.
Right.
And that follows at a much more slow time window. And if you think of the early, like when I'm talking to friends and people who don't know anything about crypto, and they're like, isn't it all scams? I'm like, yes, there is a lot of scams, but also so did the internet in like 95, right?
Sure.
Like, what do you think of the internet? It's like games, maybe like porn, and then like just like other random stuff. And now we use it for literally everything.
Yeah.
So I think crypto will follow a similar trajectory, but I can't personally predict when that inflection sort of point will happen.
Yeah.
With the internet. But
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I mean, I've heard Raul Paul talk about this as well, how people kind of are hard on the fact that a lot of stuff in crypto is just speculation or gambling, right? And he kind of makes this point that I think is interesting, where he says, well, that was the foundation of building Las Vegas as well. It was based on gambling. And look at the economies that were built out of that. Once it was proven that gambling worked in Las Vegas, people built huge hotels, and people built theaters and restaurants and bars and nightclubs and all kinds of entertainment. It was all built on the foundation of speculation, kind of making the argument that speculation isn't a bad thing necessarily, but that a lot can come out of that. And I think it's interesting because you're making the same point, but from a different perspective, where this kind of speculation brings on mass users, which tests the network, I guess, to see, can it actually support all of this, all of these users all at the same time. Because I mean, I don't know what the actual stats are. I mean, sometimes I read things like 10,000 tokens on pump.fun created every day. Like during the Trump debates, there was like 100,000 tokens created that night. Like, are these numbers? Do you have any sense of like, is that actually happening? So I see on on Twitter sometimes where there's like 10,000 tokens created on pump.fun every day, or during the Trump debates, there was like 100,000 tokens created that night or something like that, based on all the things that he was saying. Are these true numbers, and is this something that you guys are seeing from Helius' perspective?
Yeah, I can't confirm the exact number per day off the top of my head, but I could look in our databases, and I will say, generally speaking, the answer is yes. And
it's a lot,
and we suffer for it, right?
Oh, you do?
Like, yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, like we have things that, for example, provide token balances, like what does your portfolio hold, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more that data set grows, the harder it is of a technical problem to serve that quickly and efficiently. The data sets are constantly getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Even the one that's keeping track of tokens now, I think we just had to recently upgrade to a different database and swap out a bunch of like hard drives, essentially, because it was 8 terabytes and now it's exceeding 8 terabytes.
That's incredible. So as blockchain technology advances, where do you see decentralized applications development in 5 years? When you look down the road, what do you think we're going to see? And what's Helius doing to stay ahead in the evolving space?
Yeah, I'd say that at least where I hope to see things move in the next 5 years is more development on what I like to call the sort of like unsexy but important products, right? It's all the sort of things like that currently power, traditional financial system, like things like remittances and international payments and all that sort of stuff. That isn't particularly cool, but it's important, and it has very subpar UX in a lot of areas right now that we can fix. And I hope that in the next 5 years, like, some of the right signals, the tech gets there, and over time, the people who are interested in that put in the investment into developing these rails. And and then the actual end result I'm hoping to see for these decentralized applications is that we can more freely use them for like our day-to-day, financial operations. Yeah.
That's great. So I just want to wrap things up here. Where can people learn more about Helius, and where can people learn more about you, Nick?
Sure. Yeah. To learn more about Helius, you can just go to helius.dev online, and we have a blog there as well, and you can read the docs and get started. You can also find us on Twitter. I believe our Twitter is Helius_labs, and I'm also on Twitter as well. It's just Nick_Pennie.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Nick. I really appreciate you being with me.
Cool. Thanks for having me.